I stared at the stack of papers on my kitchen table like they might burst into flames and solve all my problems. 3 months of overdue rent notices. Mom's latest oncology bill, the one with all those zeros that made my stomach twist. The eviction notice some asshole had taped to my door this morning, giving me 5 whole days to magically produce money I didn't have. My phone buzzed against the scratched Formica surface. Mark's name lit up the screen, which was weird enough to make me actually look at it, instead of letting it go to voicemail like I'd been doing with everyone else lately. Need to see you. Tonight. Denny's on 5th Street. Bring your passport. I read it twice. Mark hadn't contacted me since Mom's diagnosis 4 months ago, when he'd shown up at the hospital looking uncomfortable in his cheap suit. Promised he'd help figure things out. Then disappeared back into whatever shadowy military contractor bullshit he was doing these days. The passport thing was random as hell, but then again, Mark had always been mysterious about his work. I almost deleted the message. The last thing I needed was my older brother swooping in to lecture me about responsibility while offering exactly zero practical help. But sitting here surrounded by bills I couldn't pay wasn't getting me anywhere either, and the alternative was calling Mom to tell her I was about to be homeless. 20 minutes later, I was walking into Denny's, which smelled like industrial coffee and broken dreams. Mark was already there, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall like he expected trouble. He looked different, thinner, with new lines around his eyes and a way of checking the parking lot through the window that made me think of security cameras. "Jerry." He stood up when he saw me, and for a second I thought he might try to hug me. Instead, he just gestured to the seat across from him. "You look like shit," I said, sliding into the booth. "Thanks. You too." He wasn't wrong. I'd been wearing the same jeans for 3 days, and my hoodie had a coffee stain I'd stopped trying to scrub out. "How's Mom?" "Same. Expensive." I flagged down the waitress and ordered coffee I couldn't afford. "What's this about, Mark? I've got bills to not pay." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it on the table between us like it might go off. "I have a job for you." "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's work." His voice had that flat, professional tone he'd picked up somewhere in the last few years. "Maritime contract. 1 month aboard a research vessel. $50,000. I laughed, which came out more bitter than I'd meant. "Right. What's the catch? Smuggling drugs? Human trafficking? Or are we just talking about the kind of research that requires next of kin notification?" Mark's jaw tightened. "It's legitimate. Government contract. Deep sea mineral recovery." "Since when do you know anything about mineral recovery?" "Since when do you have better options?" That shut me up. We both knew I was about 3 days away from having to choose between Mom's medication and keeping the lights on. Mark pushed the envelope closer to me. "Open it." Inside was a contract packed with more legal jargon than I could wrap my head around, a first-class plane ticket to Seattle for tomorrow morning, and a cashier's check for $5,000. The letterhead mentioned something about maritime research operations, with an address in Virginia that probably wasn't real. "This is real money," I said, holding up the check. "Advance payment. The rest comes when you complete the contract." I looked over the job description, which was so vague it told me nothing useful. Equipment operator, deep sea recovery specialist. Follow all safety protocols and direct orders from ship's captain. The salary line made my hands tremble a bit. What kind of equipment? Mechanical systems, retrieval operations. You've got the engineering background. I've got an engineering degree. There's a difference. I set the papers down. Why me, Mark? You could hire actual professionals with this kind of money. He stayed quiet for a while. watching a semi-truck pull into the parking lot. When he finally turned back to me, something in his expression made it hard to breathe. Because I trust you. And because you need this. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. The waitress brought my coffee and I wrapped my hands around the mug to stop them from shaking. $50,000 would cover Mom's treatment for the next 6 months, maybe longer if I was careful. It would buy me time to find real work, get back on my feet, stop feeling like I was drowning every time I opened the mailbox. What aren't you telling me? Mark leaned forward, dropping his voice. The work is dangerous. Deep ocean, extreme conditions. You follow orders exactly as given. No improvisation, no questions. When the alarms go off, you get away from all windows and stay in your room until you're told otherwise. What kind of alarms? The kind that mean you do what I just said. His tone left no room for argument. The ship is called the Rocinante. Captain Charlotte Reeves will brief you on arrival. You'll be working with a small crew, all professionals. Keep your head down, do your job, come home. I stared at the contract again. The legal language was thick and confusing, but I caught phrases that made my stomach twist. Extreme maritime conditions, psychological evaluation required, next of kin notification mandatory. This sounds like a suicide mission. It's not, but it's not a cruise either. Mark reached across the table and tapped the check. That's real. The job is real. The money is real. And if I don't come back, you will. How do you know? Because I'll be there too. That was the first thing he'd said that actually caught me off guard. Mark had been doing private military work for years, but he'd never brought me into it. We weren't even that close anymore. Not since Dad died and Mark decided he had to be everyone's protector. Why now? I asked. Because Mom needs the money, and you need the work, and this is what I can offer. He stood up, dropping a 20 on the table. Plane leaves at 8 a.m. Be on it. Mark, wait. I grabbed his arm as he started to leave. What happens if I say no? He glanced down at my hand on his sleeve, then back at my face. For just a second, that professional mask slipped, and I caught something that looked like guilt. Then you figure out another way to save her. He left me sitting there with the envelope and the check, and the growing certainty that I was about to make the worst decision of my life. But when I thought about calling Mom to tell her the treatment had to stop, when I pictured her trying to hide her disappointment while telling me it was okay, that she understood, I folded the contract and slipped it in my pocket. The check went in my wallet, right next to my maxed-out credit cards and my expired bus pass. $50,000. 1 month. How bad could it be? I stepped off the shuttle van onto the Seattle dock, and the first thing that hit me was how wrong everything looked. The morning fog was just starting to lift, and through it I could see the Rocinante floating in the water like some kind of military fortress that had gotten lost on its way to a war zone. This wasn't a research vessel. Research boats were white and clean-looking with lots of windows and equipment hanging off the sides. The Rocinante was painted battleship gray, riding low in the water like it was carrying serious weight. The windows were tiny and thick enough that they looked more like gun ports than portholes. Antenna arrays stuck out from every surface. The kind of communication gear I'd seen on Navy destroyers and documentaries. Mr. Torres? I turned to find a woman walking down the gangplank toward me. Mid-40s, auburn hair pulled back in a bun that looked like it had never come loose in her life, wearing a crisp white naval shirt with captain's insignia. Her handshake could have crushed walnuts. Captain Charlotte Reeves, welcome aboard. Her accent was British, clipped and professional. I trust your flight was comfortable? Yeah. First class was a nice touch. I shouldered my duffel bag. which contained basically everything I owned. "This is some ship you've got here. She's built for deep water operations. Extreme conditions require extreme preparations." Charlotte started walking up the gangplank and I followed. "Your brother spoke highly of your technical background." "My brother says a lot of things." She glanced back at me, and I caught something that might have been amusement in her green eyes. "Indeed. He's already aboard, getting settled in his quarters." The gangplank led to a deck that looked like it belonged on an aircraft carrier. Everything was steel and sharp angles, with equipment bolted down like they expected to flip upside down at any moment. Crew members worked around us with the kind of smooth efficiency that screamed military training, but when I tried to make eye contact, they'd nod politely and look away. Charlotte led me through a hatch into corridors that were wider than I'd expected, but somehow felt cramped anyway. Maybe it was the lighting, harsh fluorescence that made everything look slightly green, or maybe it was all the equipment lining the walls, stuff I couldn't identify but that buzzed with electrical current. "Your quarters are on deck 3, Charlotte said, leading me down a stairwell that was steep enough to qualify as a ladder. Mess hall serves 3 meals daily, though we stock the galley for crew members who prefer different schedules. Laundry facilities are on deck 2. We passed crew members in the corridors, and I started noticing something. They all wore similar practical clothing: polo shirts or button-ups, cargo pants, comfortable shoes. Not exactly uniforms, but coordinated enough that someone had clearly given them a dress code. And they all moved like Mark did, with this constant awareness of what was happening around them. "Here we are." Charlotte stopped at a door marked 3C and handed me a key card. "I think you'll find the accommodations adequate." I swiped the card and stepped inside, and my first thought was that someone had made a mistake. The room was huge by ship standards, bigger than my apartment bedroom back home. A single bed with storage drawers underneath, a desk with a built-in computer terminal, and a porthole window that was easily 2 feet across. But that porthole was what really grabbed my attention. The glass had to be 6 inches thick, and it bent the view of the water below like looking through the bottom of a bottle. This wasn't built for sightseeing. This was built to keep something out. "The glass is rated for extreme pressure," Charlotte said, noticing my stare. "We'll be operating at considerable depth." "How considerable?" "That will be covered in tomorrow's briefing." She checked her watch. "Dinner is at 1800 hours. I'd recommend getting settled and perhaps exploring the ship a bit. Just remember that areas marked with red signage are off limits to non-essential personnel." After she left, I unpacked my stuff, which took about 5 minutes since I'd basically brought nothing. The computer terminal was locked, requiring credentials I didn't have. The porthole showed me gray water and the occasional piece of debris floating by. I tried to open it for some fresh air and discovered it didn't open at all. The whole thing was sealed shut. I decided to take Charlotte's advice about exploring, partly because I was curious, and partly because sitting in the room was making me uncomfortable. The corridors were laid out in a grid pattern that was easy enough to navigate, but I kept running into sections blocked off with red signs that said, "Authorized personnel only," in letters big enough to see from space. The mess hall was on deck 2, a large room with bolted-down tables and a serving line that looked like it could feed a small army. A few crew members were eating early dinners, talking in quiet voices that stopped when I walked in. I grabbed a sandwich and coffee and found an empty table. "You must be Jerry." I looked up to see a black woman about my age, wearing a burgundy polo shirt and wire-rimmed glasses. She had the kind of smile that felt real, which was a nice change from the polite nods I'd been getting. "Sandra Jacobs, communications officer." She sat down across from me without being invited, which I appreciated. "How are you settling in?" "Still figuring out what I've gotten myself into." "That's normal. Deep-sea operations can be overwhelming at first. She pulled out a tablet and swiped through several screens. I need to go over some safety protocols with you. Standard procedure for all new crew members. The protocols were far from standard. Emergency stations, decompression procedures, communication blackout protocols. But the one that kept drawing her attention was the alarm system. When you hear the general alarm, and you'll know it when you hear it, it's loud enough to wake the dead. You immediately move away from all windows and external viewports. No exceptions. Why? Pressure changes at extreme depth can cause structural stress. Windows are potential failure points. Her explanation sounded rehearsed, like she'd given it a dozen times. You go to your quarters, seal the door, and wait for the all clear. Don't try to help. Don't try to see what's happening. Just get to safety and stay there. What kind of pressure changes are we talking about? Sandra's smile wavered for just a second. The kind that can kill you if you're not careful. After she left, I walked around some more and eventually found myself on deck 4, where I ran into a tall blonde woman in a lab coat who was staring at a computer screen full of data that looked like sonar readings. Oh, she jumped when she saw me, like I'd caught her doing something wrong. You must be the new equipment operator. I'm Brittany Allen, marine biology. Jerry Torres. What kind of research are you doing out here? Deep sea mineral surveys mostly. Geological formations, sediment analysis. She was talking fast, like she wanted to get through the conversation as quickly as possible. Very routine stuff, really. Nothing too exciting. What's that? I pointed at her screen, which showed what looked like a 3-dimensional map of the ocean floor. Sonar mapping. We're surveying the bottom topography for mineral deposits. She quickly minimized the screen. I should really get back to work. Nice meeting you. She basically bolted, leaving me standing there wondering what I'd said wrong. The computer screen had gone to a screensaver, but I'd gotten a good enough look to see that whatever she was mapping didn't look like any ocean floor I'd ever seen. The formations were too regular, too geometric, almost like buildings. I was walking back to my quarters when I heard voices coming from an open doorway. One of them was Mark's. Psychological profiles indicate he'll handle the stress better than most civilians. That's a hell of a gamble. This voice was unfamiliar, older, with a slight accent I couldn't place. If he breaks down at the wrong moment, he won't break down. Jerry's tougher than he looks. I froze mid-step, my back flat against the corridor wall. They were talking about me. The family connection could be an asset or a liability, the unfamiliar voice continued. Emotional attachments can compromise judgment or provide motivation to survive. Mark's voice was flat, professional. Either way, it's too late to change the roster now. I heard footsteps getting closer to the door and quickly backed away, slipping into a side hallway. Mark came out with a man I'd never seen before. Older guy, dressed in the same practical gear as everyone else, but moving like he was used to being in charge. They headed the other way, still talking too quietly for me to catch anything. Back in my room, I tried to piece together what I'd heard. Psychological profiles, family connections. It sounded way less like a job interview and way more like some kind of mental experiment. Someone knocked on my door, cutting through my thoughts. I opened it to find a woman in her early 40s with light brown hair and friendly eyes behind nice glasses. She had on a white medical coat over a soft green sweater. Jerry, I'm Dr. Sophia Becker, the ship's medical officer. I wanted to introduce myself and schedule your medical evaluation. Medical evaluation? Standard procedure for deep-sea operations. The pressure changes can affect people differently. And we like to establish baseline health metrics. She consulted a tablet. Would tomorrow morning work for you? Sure, I guess. Excellent. Also, I wanted to give you these. She handed me a small bottle of pills. Motion sickness prevention. The Rocinante is very stable, but some people are sensitive to the engine vibrations. Take one with breakfast and one with dinner. I stared at the bottle. The pills had no markings, just plain white tablets. What's in them? Mild anti-nausea medication, completely harmless. Her smile was warm and professional. I recommend starting them tonight before we reach open water. After she left, I sat on my bed and stared at the pill bottle. Everything about this ship felt wrong. The military-grade construction, the jumpy crew members, the areas I couldn't access, the way people kept dancing around what we were actually doing out here. I walked to the porthole and looked out at the water. We were moving now, the dock lights of Seattle disappearing behind us. The sun was setting, turning the water dark, and I could see lights from other ships in the distance. That's when I noticed the man standing at the end of the hallway. He wore the same work clothes as the rest of the crew, but something felt off. He stood too straight, too alert, and when I looked closer, I could make out the outline of something under his shirt that looked suspiciously like body armor. I walked to the other end of the corridor and found another one. Same rigid stance, same watchful eyes, same telltale bulge under his clothes. Armed guards, on a research vessel. I went back to my quarters and dry swallowed one of Sophia's pills, figuring that whatever was coming, I'd probably need all the help I could get. The pill had a bitter taste that stuck around in my mouth, and within an hour I felt strangely calm, like someone had turned down the volume on my worry. As I lay in bed listening to the ship's engines, I thought about Mark's words from the conversation I'd overheard. Jerry's tougher than he looks. I hoped he was right, because I was starting to think I was going to need every bit of toughness I could find. Outside my porthole, the water was getting darker, and Seattle was just aglow on the horizon behind us. Whatever we were really doing out here, there was no turning back now. I found Mark in the mess hall the next morning, slouched over a plate of scrambled eggs he was barely touching. The room was maybe half full, but everyone sat at separate tables, keeping their voices low. Mark had grabbed a corner spot where he could keep an eye on the entrance because apparently old habits never really go away. "Morning," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He glanced up from his plate like I'd broken his concentration. "Jerry, how'd you sleep?" "Like a baby. A baby having nightmares about being trapped underwater." I grabbed a cup of coffee from the serving station and sat back down. Those pills Sophia gave me knocked me out, but the dreams were weird as hell. Dreams are normal. Your brain's adjusting to being on the water. Right. I took a sip of coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. "So are you going to tell me what we're actually doing out here? Or do I have to keep playing 20 questions? Mark put down his fork and glanced around the mess hall. Most of the other crew members were wrapping up and leaving, giving us more privacy than we'd had since I came aboard. "We're retrieving an artifact," he said finally. "Deep sea recovery operation in the North Pacific." "What kind of artifact?" "The kind that's worth $50,000 to get you involved." Mark's voice had that flat, professional tone again. "Previous expedition found it 3 months ago. Lost contact during the recovery attempt." "Lost contact how?" "Equipment failure. Storm. Could be anything." But the way he said it suggested he knew exactly what had happened and didn't want to talk about it. "Point is, the artifact is still down there, and we're going to get it." I studied his face, searching for any sign he was holding back. Mark had always been awful at lying when we were kids, but whatever training he'd gotten in the military, had changed that. Still, there was something around his eyes that reminded me of the way he'd looked at Dad's funeral, like he was carrying information that was too painful to share. What kind of artifact are we talking about? Ancient pottery? Sunken treasure? You'll find out at the briefing. Before I could push him further, Charlotte's voice came over the intercom system, crisp and authoritative. All crew members to the main briefing room. Mandatory attendance. The briefing room was on deck 2, a windowless space with bolted-down chairs arranged in rows facing a large screen. The crew filed in with the kind of quiet efficiency I was starting to recognize as the ship's default mode. I counted maybe 15 people total, which seemed small for a vessel this size. Charlotte stood at the front of the room wearing the same white shirt as yesterday, though somehow it still looked like she'd just put it on. Behind her, the screen showed a map of the North Pacific with a red dot marking our destination. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Operation Deep Recovery. She clicked a remote, and the map zoomed in on the red dot. Our target is located approximately 200 nautical miles northwest of our current position, at a depth of 14,000 feet. 14,000 feet. I tried to wrap my head around that number, nearly 3 miles straight down, in water so deep that the pressure would crush a human body in milliseconds. The object we're retrieving is what our geological team has classified as a biogenic mineral formation of significant archaeological value. Charlotte's tone suggested she was reading from a script. Initial surveys indicate it's approximately 1 meter in diameter, with unique crystalline properties that make it extremely valuable for research purposes. Brittany stood up from the front row, tablet in hand. She looked even more nervous than she had yesterday, if that was even possible. The depth we're working at presents unique challenges, she said, her voice slightly shaky. The pressure at 14,000 feet is over 400 times greater than at sea level. More importantly, prolonged exposure to extreme depths can have psychological effects on crew members. What kind of psychological effects? Asked Sandra from somewhere behind me. Disorientation, anxiety, hallucinations in extreme cases. Brittany was talking faster now, like she wanted to get through this part quickly. That's why it's crucial that everyone follows safety protocols exactly as outlined. No deviations, no improvisation. Charlotte took back control of the presentation. Here's our timeline. 2 weeks to reach the target site, where we'll finish equipment checks and crew prep. Once we're there, we'll send down the ship's deep-sea submersible to recover the artifacts. The whole mission shouldn't take more than 4 weeks. She clicked to the next slide, showing a technical diagram of what looked like a small submarine. This submersible can handle extreme depths, and it's got specialized gear for retrieving things. Only certified operators are allowed on board during recovery. I raised my hand. What happened to the previous expedition? The room went quiet. Charlotte's expression didn't change, but I caught a quick look between her and Mark. Equipment failure during the recovery attempt, she said. Radio contact was lost due to a storm system that moved through the area. The vessel was recovered 3 weeks later with no survivors. What kind of equipment failure? The investigation is ongoing. Charlotte's tone made it clear that was the end of that discussion. Dr. Becker, would you like to address the medical protocols? Sophia stood up from the middle of the room, her warm smile somehow not quite reaching her eyes. As Brittany mentioned, deep-sea operations can be stressful on both the body and mind. I'll be monitoring everyone's health throughout the mission and providing medication as needed. She held up a bottle identical to the one she'd given me the night before. These pills help with motion sickness and anxiety related to pressure changes. I recommend taking them twice daily with meals. They're completely safe and will help ensure everyone stays comfortable during the operation. What's in them? I asked. Mild anti-anxiety medication, combined with motion sickness prevention, standard for deep-sea operations. Sophia's explanation sounded rehearsed, just like Charlotte's. I'll be conducting individual health assessments over the next few days to establish baseline metrics for each crew member. The briefing wrapped up with technical details about work schedules and safety procedures, but I was only half listening. Something about the whole presentation felt off, like everyone was reading from the same script and trying very hard not to stick to it. After the meeting, I decided to explore more of the ship. The hallways on Deck 3 were mostly crew quarters and storage areas, but when I tried to go down to Deck 4, I found my way blocked by a crew member I hadn't seen before. Sorry, authorized personnel only below this level, he said. He was wearing the same practical clothes as everyone else, but there was something about his posture that screamed security. When he moved, I caught a glimpse of something under his shirt that looked suspiciously like body armor. What's down there? Equipment storage. Nothing interesting. His smile was polite but didn't invite further conversation. I tried a different stairwell and found another guard. This one a woman with the same alert posture and the same polite but firm refusal to let me pass. Whatever was on the lower decks, they really didn't want crew members wandering around down there. The ship's sonar system had been running constantly since we left port, sending out low-frequency pulses that I could feel more than hear. The vibration traveled through the hull and into my bones, a steady rhythm that was starting to get on my nerves. I found Mark on Deck 5, standing in what appeared to be a navigation center, filled with screens showing sonar readings and depth charts. The pulses were louder here, coming from speakers mounted in the ceiling. "What's with the constant sonar?" I asked. "Navigation. We need detailed bottom mapping for the submersible operations." Mark didn't look away from the screens. "The ocean floor at our target site is extremely complex. Lots of underwater formations that could interfere with the recovery." "Formations like what?" "Trenches, ridges, that kind of thing." His explanation felt rehearsed, just like everyone else's. "The sonar helps us build a three-dimensional map so we know exactly what we're dealing with." I stared at the screens for a few minutes. The sonar reading showed the ocean floor as a series of peaks and valleys, but something about the patterns looked off. Too regular, too geometric, like someone had built structures down there instead of letting geology do its work naturally. "Mark, what aren't you telling me?" He finally looked at me, and for just a second, I caught something in his face that seemed like guilt, or maybe fear. "I'm telling you everything you need to know to do your job and get home safely." He turned back to the screens. "That's all that matters." But as I walked back to my quarters, listening to the constant pulse of the sonar system and thinking about the guards on the lower decks, I was pretty sure that wasn't true. Whatever we were really doing out here, it was a lot more complicated than retrieving some archaeological artifact from the ocean floor. And the way everyone kept talking about safety protocols and following orders exactly, like our lives depended on it, was starting to make me think that maybe they actually did. The nightmares started on day 5. I'd been sleeping okay up until then, thanks to whatever Sophia was putting in those pills. But Tuesday night I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat and breathing hard like I'd just run a marathon. In the dream, I'd been floating in black water so deep I couldn't see the surface, couldn't see the bottom, couldn't see anything except endless dark pressing in from all sides. Something huge had been moving beneath me, circling closer and closer, and I'd known with absolute certainty that when it reached me, I was going to die. The weird part was how real it felt. Even awake, I could still taste salt water in my mouth and feel the pressure of all that water trying to crush me. I checked my watch. 3 in the morning. Through my porthole, the ocean looked exactly like it had in the dream, black and endless, and somehow hungry. At breakfast, I wasn't the only one who looked like hell. Sandra had dark circles under her eyes that her glasses couldn't hide, and she kept rubbing her temples like she had a pounding headache. 2 tables over, a guy from the engineering crew was staring at his coffee like he'd forgotten what it was for. "Rough night?" I asked Sandra when she sat down across from me. "Weird dreams?" She picked at her scrambled eggs without eating them. "You?" "Yeah, drowning mostly." "Same." She looked up at me, and I saw something in her expression that made my stomach clench. "Jerry, have you noticed how quiet everyone's gotten?" She was right. The mess hall used to buzz with normal conversation, people chatting about their shifts or griping about the food. Now everyone spoke in whispers, if they talked at all. It was like the ship had picked up library rules without anyone officially announcing them. "Maybe people are just tired," I said. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't the whole story. The sonar pulses had been picking up too. What started as occasional beeps every few minutes had turned into a steady beat that never quit. The sound traveled through the hull and into my bones, a constant reminder that we were floating over miles of empty water. Charlotte's voice came over the intercom, crisp and professional as always. "All crew members, please note that we are approaching our target coordinates. Estimated arrival at the dive site is 6 p.m. today." Sandra and I looked at each other. 6 p.m. After 5 days of sailing, we were finally getting close to whatever we'd come out here to find. "Deep sea mineral recovery," I said, repeating the official story. "Right." Sandra's tone suggested she believed that about as much as I did. I spent the morning trying to find Brittany, partly because I was curious about what her sonar readings were showing, and partly because I was getting worried about her. The last few times I'd seen her, she'd looked increasingly frazzled, like someone who hadn't been sleeping well and was surviving on caffeine and nervous energy. I found her on deck 4, hunched over a computer terminal that showed what looked like a 3-dimensional map of the ocean floor. She was so focused on the screen that she didn't notice me until I was standing right behind her. "Jesus." She spun around, nearly knocking over her coffee. "You scared me." "Sorry. I was just curious about what you're working on." She glanced back at the screen, then quickly minimized the window. "Just routine mapping. Nothing interesting." But I'd gotten a good look at the display before she closed it, and routine wasn't the word I'd use. The ocean floor at our destination looked like someone had built a city down there. Geometric structures, regular patterns, formations that were way too organized to be natural. "Brittany, what exactly are we going to find down there?" "I don't know." She was talking fast again, the way she did when she was nervous. "The sonar readings they're not what I expected. The formations are much more complex than the initial surveys indicated." "Complex how?" "They're too regular, too organized." She pulled up a different screen, this one showing sonar data from the past few hours. "Look at this pattern here, and here. These aren't geological formations, Jerry. They're structures." "What kind of structures?" "I don't know. And that's what's bothering me." She rubbed her eyes behind her glasses. "I've been studying deep sea geology for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's like someone built something down there, and then the ocean covered it up." Before I could ask more questions, her computer chimed with an incoming message. She looked at it quickly, and her face went pale. "I have to go. Charlotte wants to see me." She gathered up her papers and practically ran out of the room, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. I needed to find Mark and get some real answers, but when I tracked him down to the navigation center, he was deep in conversation with Charlotte and two crew members I'd never seen before. The moment I walked in, they all went quiet. "Jerry." Mark's tone was carefully neutral. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to ask about our destination. Brittany's sonar readings are showing some pretty weird stuff down there." Charlotte stepped forward. "Mr. Torres, I get your curiosity, but the technical details of our operation are on a need-to-know basis. And I don't need to know. You need to know how to operate the equipment you'll be assigned to and how to follow safety protocols." Her green eyes were steady and uncompromising. "Everything else is secondary." Mark grabbed my arm as I turned to go. "Jerry, we're going to be working at extreme depth, nearly 3 miles down. The Rocinante is specially built for this kind of job. Reinforced hull, advanced pressurization systems, the whole package. But it's still dangerous as hell." "How dangerous?" "The kind where following orders exactly could be the difference between going home and not going home." His expression was serious, in a way that reminded me of Dad trying to explain why I couldn't play in traffic. "When we start the descent tomorrow, things are going to get intense. The pressure down there is over 400 times what we're used to. It does things to people." "What kind of things?" "Disorientation, anxiety. Some people hallucinate." Mark glanced around the navigation center, making sure we weren't being overheard. "That's why Sophia's been giving everyone those medications. They help your brain handle the pressure changes." "Is that really what's in those pills?" "Jerry, I need you to trust me on this. Take the medication, follow the safety protocols, and do your job. That's how we all get home safely." But as I walked back to my quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that safely was becoming less and less likely. At dinner, the lights flickered, not once or twice, but a series of deliberate blinks that felt almost like a pattern. Conversation stopped, and everyone glanced up at the ceiling like they expected an announcement. "Electrical fluctuations," Charlotte said from the captain's table. "Normal for deep-sea operations." But Sandra, who was sitting next to me, pulled out her tablet and started typing notes. When I looked over her shoulder, I saw she was recording when the lights blinked on and off. "What are you doing?" "The pattern," she whispered. "It's not random." Before I could ask what she meant, her radio equipment started picking up sounds from outside the ship. Not the usual ocean noises, whale songs, or dolphin clicks, but something rhythmic and deliberate. It sounded almost like music, if music could be made by something that had never heard human voices. "Sandra, what is that?" "I don't know." She was adjusting dials on her equipment, trying to get a clearer signal. "It's coming from below us, deep below us." The sounds went on for maybe 10 minutes, getting louder and softer in patterns that seemed way too organized to be natural. Then they just stopped, leaving the mess hall quiet in a way that felt worse than before. Charlotte got up from her table. "Ladies and gentlemen, effective immediately, all crew members will increase their medication dosage to twice daily. Dr. Becker will hand out the extra pills after dinner." "Why?" asked one of the engineering crew. "Pressure changes. We'll be beginning our descent tomorrow morning, and the transition can be difficult for people who aren't properly prepared." Sophia showed up at my table with a small bottle of pills. "Take one now and one before bed," she said, her warm smile not quite hiding the concern in her eyes. "It'll help with the adjustment." I dry swallowed the pill, which had the same bitter taste as before. Within an hour, that weird sense of peace washed over me again, like someone had taken my worries and locked them away somewhere I couldn't reach. but the peace didn't help with the dreams. I woke up around 2 in the morning, not from a nightmare this time, but from the feeling that something was off with my room. The air felt thick and sticky, like being inside a greenhouse. When I sat up, I realized my porthole window was completely fogged over from the inside. That was strange enough, but as I watched, the water drops started forming patterns. Not random droplets, but organized shapes that looked almost like writing. Symbols or letters from some language I didn't recognize, appearing and disappearing as the moisture moved across the glass. I got out of bed and walked closer to the window, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The designs kept changing, new symbols replacing old ones, like someone was writing messages on the other side of the glass. I grabbed my phone to snap a photo, but by the time I got the camera app open, the condensation had faded back to normal water droplets. Just random moisture on glass, nothing more. But I knew what I'd seen, and as I lay back down, listening to the steady ping of the sonar system and the odd groaning sounds the ship made as it cut through the water, I couldn't shake the feeling that something down in that black water was trying to communicate with us. And maybe, just maybe, it was starting to succeed. The engines changed at dawn. I felt it before I heard it. A shift in the ship's rhythm that went from the steady buzz we'd gotten used to something deeper, more deliberate. Like the Rocinante had decided to stop pretending it was just another research vessel and start acting like what it really was. A machine built to go places no sane person would want to visit. I was already awake when it happened, lying in my bunk and staring at the ceiling while trying to convince myself that the strange dreams were just stress. The pill Sophia had given me the night before was supposed to help with that. But all it really did was make everything feel like it was happening underwater, slow and muffled and wrong. Through my porthole, the ocean was changing color. What had been normal blue water yesterday was turning green, then to something darker that made my stomach tighten. We were going down. Really down. I got dressed and went to the mess hall, but the corridors felt wrong too. Quieter. The few crew members I passed walked with careful, measured steps, like they were crossing a minefield. Nobody looked at each other. Nobody talked unless they had to. The mess hall was maybe a quarter full, and any conversations happened in hushed tones. Sandra sat alone at a corner table, bent over her tablet with a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. "Morning," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. She looked up, and I saw that the dark circles under her eyes had gotten worse. "We lost surface contact about an hour ago." "Lost contact how?" "Radio signals can't penetrate this deep. It's normal for deep-sea operations." But the way she said it suggested she didn't think it was normal at all. "Charlotte says we'll regain contact when we reach our operational depth and deploy the communication buoys." I grabbed some coffee and toast, though I could barely stomach anything after what we'd seen. "How deep are we going?" 14,000 feet, nearly 3 miles straight down." Sandra rubbed her temples like she was fighting a headache. "Jerry, have you looked outside recently?" I looked toward the mess hall's small porthole. The water outside was black now, so dark that the ship's external lights barely reached a few feet before vanishing completely. It felt like floating through space, except space didn't have the weight of 3 miles of water pressing down on you. "It's just deep water," I said. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. The ship's hull groaned around us, a low rumble that seemed to come from every direction. A few crew members glanced up nervously, but nobody spoke. Charlotte's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and professional as always. "All crew members, please note that we are beginning our descent to operational depth. Hull stress sounds are normal and expected. Continue with your assigned duties." Normal and expected. Right. I spent the morning hunting down Brittany, partly because I wanted to check her sonar readings and partly because she was starting to worry me. The last few times I'd run into her, she'd looked like someone surviving on coffee and pure anxiety. I tracked her down on deck 4, where she sat surrounded by computer screens displaying 3D maps of the ocean floor. She was so absorbed in the data that she didn't even know I was there until I cleared my throat behind her. Jesus. She spun around, nearly knocking over a stack of printouts. You scared me. Sorry. I was just curious about what you're seeing down there. She glanced back at the screens, then at me, like she was trying to decide how much to tell me. The structures they're not what we expected. I looked at the sonar displays over her shoulder. The ocean floor at our destination looked like someone had built a city down there and then abandoned it to the deep. Geometric shapes, regular patterns, arrangements that were way too organized to be natural geology. What kind of formations are we talking about? I don't know, and that's the problem. Brittany pulled up a different screen, this one showing sonar data from the past few hours. Look at this pattern here. And here. These aren't rock formations, Jerry. They're structures. Built structures. Built by who? That's what I've been trying to figure out. She rubbed her eyes behind her glasses. The sonar readings are showing something massive down there. Not just the structures, but something moving between them. Something big. Before I could ask more questions, her computer chimed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, and her face went pale. I have to go. Charlotte wants to see me. She gathered up her papers and practically ran out of the room, leaving me standing there with a growing certainty that, whatever we were heading toward, it wasn't going to be anything like the mineral recovery operation they described in the briefing. The ship's hull groaned again, louder this time. Through the porthole in Brittany's lab, the water outside was completely black now, like we were floating through ink. The external lights created a small bubble of visibility around the ship, but beyond that was nothing but darkness pressing against the glass. I decided to find Mark and get some real answers. I tracked him down to the navigation center, where he was standing in front of a bank of monitors showing depth readings and pressure measurements. The numbers were climbing steadily as we went down, and they were already way beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Mark, we need to talk. He looked up from the monitors, and I caught something in his face that I'd never seen before. Fear, maybe, or guilt. What's on your mind? Everything. The sonar readings, the structures on the ocean floor, the way everyone's acting like we're heading into a war zone. I gestured toward the monitors. What are we really doing down here? Mark stayed quiet for a long moment, watching the depth readings climb. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. We're retrieving an artifact. That part was true. What kind of artifact? Not mineral, biological. He turned to face me fully. It's a pearl, Jerry. About the size of a basketball, growing in a deep-sea trench. The geological surveys suggest it's been down there for thousands of years, maybe longer. A pearl? What's so special about a pearl that it's worth all this? The previous expedition's final transmission mentioned that it was protected. Protected how? Mark's face grew even more serious. By something that drove the research team insane before their ship disappeared. The words hit me like cold water. Insane how? The last radio contact was 3 months ago. The crew was reporting hallucinations, paranoid behavior, complete psychological breakdown. Then nothing. Mark looked back at the monitors. The ship was found 2 weeks later, drifting on the surface. No survivors. And we're going to the same place? We're better prepared. Sophia's medications, the ship's reinforced hull. improved safety protocols. But the way he said it suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The artifact is too valuable to leave down there. Valuable to who? Before Mark could answer, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Charlotte's voice came through, but with an edge I'd never heard before. All crew members, report to your assigned stations. We are approaching operational depth. Through the navigation center's window, I could see we were still going down. The pressure readings on Mark's monitors kept climbing into numbers that made my head spin. We were deeper than most submarines ever went, deeper than humans were supposed to go, heading towards something that had already killed one crew. Mark, why did you really bring me on this mission? He stayed silent for so long that I figured he wouldn't answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because we needed someone who could operate the retrieval equipment if the primary team failed. And you thought I was expendable enough to risk? I thought you were tough enough to survive. The ship's hull groaned around us again, and this time it sounded like the metal was being tested beyond its limits. Through the porthole, something flashed in the darkness outside. Not the ship's lights reflecting off debris, but something else. Something that pulsed with its own rhythm. Sophia's voice came over the intercom. All crew members requiring medication, please report to the medical bay. Increased dosages are now available. I looked at Mark. What kind of medication? Sedatives, anti-anxiety drugs, things to keep your mind stable when we encounter whatever's protecting that pearl. And if the medication doesn't work, Mark's expression was grim. Then we hope the ship's hull holds long enough to get back to the surface. Right on cue, the first alarm went off. A sharp, wailing noise that sliced through the ship. Every crew member I could see immediately stopped what they were doing and stepped away from the windows and external viewports, just like Sandra had warned me about on my first day. What's that alarm for? Pressure changes, Mark said, but he was already moving away from the porthole. Jerry, get away from the window. Now. I followed him toward the center of the navigation room, but I couldn't help taking one last look outside. The water beyond the glass was completely black now, but there was something moving in that darkness, something big enough to block out the ship's lights. And as I watched, it started coming our way. The briefing room felt like a tomb. No windows, thick walls that could stop a tank shell, and air that tasted recycled and stale. Charlotte had called the meeting 2 hours after that first alarm, and now all 15 of us were crammed into bolted-down chairs, facing a screen that showed nothing but static. I sat next to Mark, trying to figure out what he was thinking, but he'd gone full military, expressionless face, rigid posture, eyes locked on Charlotte like she was about to announce the end of the world. Maybe she was. Ladies and gentlemen, Charlotte began, her British accent crisp even though I could see the stress lines around her eyes. It's time you knew what we're really doing down here. The static on the screen disappeared, showing a map of the Pacific Ocean covered with dozens of red dots spread everywhere. Each dot had coordinates and dates written next to it, some going back decades. Operation Deep Recovery is part of a classified government program that has been active since 1952. We retrieve artifacts of potential extraterrestrial origin from deep ocean crash sites. The words slammed into the room. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Jesus Christ," under their breath. The object we're here to recover isn't a mineral formation. It's a biological artifact, what we've been calling a pearl, that contains genetic material from something that impacted Earth's oceans approximately 65 million years ago. 65 million years. The same time the dinosaurs died. Charlotte clicked to the next slide,
showing a three-dimensional image of something that looked like a massive sphere covered in organic patterns. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like looking at a virus under a microscope.
The artifact is approximately 1 meter in diameter and appears to be some form of preserved biological sample. Previous analysis of similar objects has revealed genetic sequences that don't match any known Earth-based life forms. Brittany raised her hand, and I could see it trembling. Captain, my sonar's picking up huge movement in the trench below us. Something's down there, and it's been going around our position for the past 6 hours. Which brings us to the primary challenge of this operation. Charlotte's expression got even more serious. The artifacts aren't unguarded. Each crash site is protected by what we believe to be a surviving entity from the original impact event. The room fell completely quiet except for the steady creaking of the ship's hull under pressure. The creature below us has been dormant for millions of years, but our presence has awakened it. Sonar indicates it's approximately 400 meters in length and demonstrates clear signs of intelligence and purpose. 400 meters. That was taller than most skyscrapers. Sandra called out from across the room. Captain, what happened to the previous expedition? They attempted the retrieval without proper preparation. The creature's influence drove the crew insane within hours of making contact. The ship was found drifting on the surface 2 weeks later with no survivors. Sophia stood up, her medical bag clutched tight. Which is why I need to explain what I've really been giving you. My stomach dropped. The pills. The twice-daily medication that was supposed to help with motion sickness and pressure changes. The tablets contain experimental psychotropic compounds designed to protect human minds from the creature's psychological influence. Without them, direct exposure to the entity results in immediate and permanent madness. I thought about all the times I'd choked down those bitter pills, trusting they were helping with seasickness. What kind of psychotropic compounds? Classified neural inhibitors that block certain types of telepathic interference. The side effects include mild sedation, emotional dampening, and short-term memory disruption. You've been drugging us without our consent. I've been keeping you sane. Sophia's voice was steady, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. The creature communicates through direct mental contact. Without protection, exposure to its consciousness would leave you catatonic or worse. Mark finally spoke up. The psychological profiles showed that family connections might give us extra stability when facing the entity. That's why Jerry's here. All eyes turned to me, and I felt like I was going to throw up. What do you mean? That's why I'm here. The mission planners needed someone who could operate the retrieval equipment if the primary team failed. Someone with mechanical engineering background, but without military training, that might make them resistant to following orders. Someone expendable, I said, the words tasting like poison. Mark's jaw tightened. Someone tough enough to survive what we're about to face. Charlotte clicked to the next slide, showing technical diagrams of a submersible that looked more like a deep-sea torpedo than a research vehicle. The automated retrieval system will deploy in approximately 4 hours. Once it begins descent toward the artifact, the creature will know we're here and will try to stop us from reaching the surface. Attempt how? Asked one of the engineering crew. Physical attack on the ship, psychological assault on the crew, and manipulation of our equipment systems. The entity appears to have some form of electromagnetic control that can interfere with our electronics. Sandra's radio equipment suddenly came alive with static, catching sounds from beyond the ship's hull. Not the familiar ocean background noise, but something with a clear pattern and intent. It sounded like whale song, if whales could sing in mathematical equations. "That's it," Brittany whispered. "That's the creature. It knows we're here. The sounds went on for several minutes, getting louder and softer in patterns that seemed too planned to be natural. Then they stopped, leaving the briefing room in a quiet that felt thicker than the water pressing against our hull. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charlotte said, "once we begin the recovery operation, there's no turning back. The creature will not allow us to leave without the artifact, and it will not allow us to take the artifact without a fight." I scanned the room at my crewmates' faces. Some looked scared out of their minds, others set with grim resolve, but every single one wore the look of someone who just realized they probably weren't making it home. "Why?" I asked. "Why is this thing so important that it's worth all our lives?" Charlotte stayed quiet for a long moment. "Because if we don't get it back, someone else will. And if the wrong people get their hands on alien genetic material, the results could be devastating for all of humanity." The ship's hull groaned around us again, and this time it sounded like something was testing our defenses. Through the briefing room's thick walls, I could hear the sonar system picking up massive movement below us. Mark grabbed my arm as people started filing out of the room. "Jerry, I need you to understand something. I didn't bring you here because you were expendable. I brought you here because you're the only person I trust to do what needs to be done if everything goes sideways." "And what exactly needs to be done?" "Whatever it takes to make sure that thing down there doesn't follow us to the surface." As I walked back to my room, listening to the creature's song bouncing through the ship's metal walls, I realized that Mark had been right about one thing. I was tough enough to survive what we were about to face. The question was whether I'd still be human when it was over. The lights outside my porthole weren't random anymore. I'd been lying in my bunk for hours, staring through that thick glass into the black water, and what I was seeing made my skin crawl. Pulses of light, organized and deliberate, like someone was sending Morse code with a flashlight the size of a building. Every time our sonar pinged, the lights responded. Every time the ship's engines changed, they got brighter. Something down there knew we were here, and it was trying to talk to us. I must have dozed off around 4 in the morning because the next thing I knew, someone was banging on my door. Hard, urgent knocks that meant trouble. "Jerry, open up." Mark's voice, but with an edge I'd never heard before. I stumbled out of bed and unlocked the door to find my brother standing in the hall, fully dressed and looking like he hadn't slept at all. "We need to talk." "Yeah, we do." I stepped back to let him in, then closed the door behind him. Starting with why you decided to volunteer me for a suicide mission without mentioning the part about alien artifacts and mind-controlling sea monsters. Mark dropped into my desk chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked old, worn down in a way that went deeper than just missing sleep. "The mission is crucial to national security, Jerry. If we don't retrieve that artifact, someone else will. China, Russia, private military contractors who don't care about the consequences." "What consequences?" "Genetic material from something that wiped out the dinosaurs. In the wrong hands, it could be weaponized into something that makes nuclear bombs look like firecrackers." I stared at him. "So you thought those hands belonged to me?" "I thought you needed the money badly enough to see it through." Mark's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. "And I thought you were tough enough to survive what we're about to face." Tough enough or expendable enough? Both. The honesty of it caught me off guard. At least he wasn't lying anymore. Before I could respond, Brittany's voice crackled over the intercom, high-pitched and panicked. "All crew to emergency stations. I'm reading massive movement from the trench floor. Something big is rising toward our position." Mark jumped up right away, but I grabbed his arm. "We're not done talking about this." "Yeah, we are. He pulled free and headed for the door. Because if Brittany's right, we might not get another chance. I followed him into the corridor, where crew members were moving with the kind of controlled panic that meant everyone knew we were in serious trouble. The ship's emergency lighting had kicked in, bathing everything in red, and the constant sonar pings had gotten faster, more urgent. Charlotte's voice boomed over the intercom. "All crew to emergency stations, starting retrieval sequence. This is not a drill." The navigation center was chaos when we got there. Brittany stood hunched over her sonar displays, her face pale as she tracked something rising from the depths below us. Charlotte shouted orders at crew members who were frantically checking systems and preparing equipment I didn't recognize. "How big?" Charlotte asked Brittany. "Bigger than the ship. Much bigger." Brittany's voice was shaking. "It's been dormant on the trench floor, but our presence has awakened it. Estimated length 400 meters and climbing toward us at approximately 50 meters per minute." 400 meters. That was taller than the Empire State Building. "Deploy the submersible," Charlotte ordered. "We get the artifact and get out before that thing reaches us." Through the navigation center's reinforced windows, I watched as a section of the ship's hull opened, and something that looked like a torpedo with arms dropped into the black water below us. External cameras tracked its descent toward coordinates that Brittany was calling out in a steady stream of numbers. "Sub is at 2,000 meters and descending," Sandra reported from her communication station. "All systems nominal." On the main screen, we watched the submersible's lights slice through the darkness as it dropped toward whatever was waiting for us on the ocean floor. The water around us was getting stranger, filled with particles that sparkled when the lights hit them, like we were floating through liquid starlight. 3,000 meters, Sandra called out. "Approaching target coordinates." The camera feed from the underwater vessel showed something that made my brain hurt to look at. Structures that might have been coral reefs, except they were made of materials that bounced light in ways that shouldn't be possible. Geometric patterns that looked too organized to be natural, too strange to be human, and in the center of it all, something that had its own bright glow. "Visual contact with the artifact," Sandra announced, "beginning retrieval sequence." Sophia showed up beside me, carrying a tray of her pills, but when she held them out, I could see her hands trembling. "The medications aren't working as well as they should," she said quietly. "Several crew members are reporting auditory hallucinations and peripheral vision disturbances." "What kind of hallucinations?" "Voices speaking in languages that don't exist. Movement in empty corridors. The sensation of being watched by something that isn't there." I looked around the navigation center and realized she was right. Half the crew kept glancing over their shoulders or stopping mid-sentence like they were listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. "Sub has secured the artifact," Sandra called out. "Beginning ascent." On the screen, we watched the submersible's robotic arms wrap around something that looked like a huge pearl, except it throbbed with glowing patterns that stung our eyes when we looked straight at it. The second the sub made contact, every light in the water around us began blinking in perfect sync. "That's not good," Brittany whispered. The ship's hull started shaking with a vibration that made my teeth hurt. This wasn't the usual creaking of metal under stress, but something steady and deliberate, like the whole ocean was singing a tune no human was meant to hear. Sandra's radio gear suddenly burst to life with noise. Voices, tons of them, talking over each other in frantic transmissions that flooded the navigation room with static and panic. "Mayday, Mayday, this is research vessel Cousteau. Do not approach the artifact. Repeat, do not approach. The crew is. The radio went dead with a burst of screaming, then nothing. "That's impossible," Sandra said, her face white. "The Cousteau was the ship that disappeared 3 months ago." More voices joined the first. all of them broadcasting on frequencies that should have been empty. Distress calls from expeditions that had vanished years ago, decades ago, all of them saying the same thing. Get out. Leave the artifact. Don't let it reach the surface. But underneath the human voices was something else, something that spoke without words, directly into the part of your brain that controlled fear and survival instincts. It was old, older than human civilization, older than human language, and it was very, very angry that we were here. Sub is at 1,000 meters and rising, Sandra reported, but her voice was barely audible over the cacophony from her radio equipment. Through the external cameras, I could see the submersible climbing toward us, the artifact gripped in its mechanical arms like a bright beacon pulled from the ocean floor. And behind it, rising from the depths with terrifying speed, was a shadow so large it swallowed the lights from the structures below. The creature was coming for us, and we had nowhere to run. Mark grabbed my shoulder, his grip tight enough to bruise. Jerry, listen to me. Whatever happens next, whatever you see or hear, remember that you're tougher than you think you are. What's that supposed to mean? But before he could answer, something crashed into the Rocinante's hull with enough power to send everyone in the navigation center sprawling. The lights cut out, emergency power hummed to life, and through the red-tinted darkness, I heard Charlotte's voice over the intercom. All crew members, this is not a drill. We are under attack. The impact threw me across my quarters like I weighed nothing. 1 second I was standing by my desk, trying to make sense of the chaos coming through the intercom, and the next I was slamming into the far wall hard enough to see stars. The ship lurched so violently to starboard that my stomach dropped into my boots, and the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. The hull was screaming, not groaning like it had been for the past hour, but actually screaming. Metal twisting and buckling under pressure that was way beyond anything the Rocinante was built to handle. Through the floor, I could feel vibrations that weren't coming from our engines. Something was touching the ship. I pulled myself upright, ears ringing, and stumbled toward my porthole. The thick glass was fogged with condensation, but I wiped it clear with my sleeve and peered out into the black water. An eye stared back at me. Not a fish eye or a whale eye, but something the size of a subway car, very old and intelligent and completely alien. The pupil was a vertical slit that tightened when it focused on me, and the iris was a color that doesn't exist in nature, somewhere between deep purple and the kind of black you see when you close your eyes too tight. It knew I was watching it. Worse, it was watching back. The mental attack hit me like a sledgehammer to the brain. Visions flooded my mind, cosmic emptiness stretching for billions of years, civilizations rising and falling like waves, the certainty that humanity was nothing more than bacteria on a rock spinning through an indifferent universe. I saw the death of stars, the heat death of everything, the absolute meaninglessness of every choice I'd ever made or would ever make. I pulled myself away from the window, gasping and shaking. The visions faded, but the taste of cosmic despair stuck in my mouth like copper pennies. Charlotte's voice crackled over the intercom, barely audible over the sound of the ship's structure failing. All crew members, the submersible has successfully retrieved the artifact before being destroyed. We are currently under direct attack and being pulled deeper into the trench. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. The ship lurched again, and this time, I could see what was happening through my porthole. Massive arms, tentacles maybe, or something worse, were wrapping around the Rocinante's hull like a giant squid grabbing prey. Except these weren't squid arms. They were covered in what looked like scales or armor plating, and they pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns I'd seen on the artifact. We were being dragged down. I stumbled into the corridor, where crew members ran in both directions, some heading for emergency stations, and others just moving because standing still felt like giving up. The red emergency lighting made everyone look like they were bleeding, and the constant groaning of the hull got louder by the minute. "Jerry!" Mark showed up at the end of the hallway, walking toward me with that focused look that meant he'd already made up his mind about something I wouldn't like. He was holding something, a metal case about the size of a briefcase, with a faint glow coming through the edges. "We need to talk. Now." He grabbed my arm and pulled me into an empty storage room, closing the door behind us. The case in his hands was warm and buzzing with some kind of internal energy. "Is that the pearl?" "Yeah." Mark set the case down carefully, like it might explode if he dropped it. "The sub got it before the creature destroyed the retrieval system. But now we've got a bigger problem." "Bigger than being attacked by a 400-meter sea monster?" "The creature isn't going to let us leave with this thing. It's been guarding the artifact for millions of years, and it's not about to stop now." Mark's face was grim in the red emergency lighting. "Charlotte's trying to fire the emergency ballast systems, but the creature's grip is too strong. We're being pulled deeper, and the hull won't hold much longer." The ship shook again, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of metal ripping apart. "So, what's the plan?" Mark stayed quiet for a long time, and I could see him wrestling with something. When he finally looked at me again, his face had that same look from Dad's funeral, like he was about to say something that would turn everything upside down. "Someone has to take the pearl and leave the ship, draw the creature's attention away from the Rocinante long enough for Charlotte to get everyone to the surface." "Leave the ship how? We're 3 miles underwater." "Pressurized diving suit. There's one in the emergency equipment bay that's rated for extreme depth operations." Mark opened the case, revealing the artifact nestled in protective foam. The pearl was stunning and horrifying all at once. About the size of a basketball, perfectly round, and made of something that looked like crystal, but flowed like liquid. Patterns of light swirled through its surface, not random bioluminescence, but organized, purposeful, like watching thoughts form in a see-through brain. Staring at it made my head hurt. "Mark, that's suicide. Even if the suit works, even if you somehow survive the pressure, that thing out there will kill you the second you hit the water. Maybe, or maybe it'll be so focused on getting the artifact back that it'll ignore the ship long enough for you to escape." "For me to escape?" "You're going home, Jerry. You're going to take care of Mom, and you're going to live a normal life, and you're going to forget this ever happened." The ship lurched again, harder this time, and the lights flickered. Through the storage room's thin walls, I could hear Sophia's voice over the intercom, calling for all crew members to report to the medical bay for emergency medication distribution. "I'm not letting you do this. You don't get a choice." Mark closed the case and picked it up. "This is what I signed up for. What we both signed up for, even if you didn't know it at the time. There has to be another way." "There isn't." Mark headed for the door, then stopped and looked back at me. "Jerry, I need you to understand something. I didn't bring you here because you were expendable. I brought you here because you're the strongest person I know, and I knew you'd be able to handle whatever happened next." "What's supposed to happen next?" "You're going to survive. You're going to make it to the surface, and you're going to live with what you've seen down here. And that's going to be harder than anything else you've ever done." Before I could say anything, he vanished, leaving me alone in the storage room with that awful taste of cosmic despair still coating my mouth and the groaning sound of the ship's hull slowly coming apart around me. I went after him into the corridor, where Sophia was giving out pills to crew members who looked like they were barely keeping it together. When she spotted me, she pushed 2 tablets into my palm. "Take these now." The creature's psychological influence is getting stronger, and several crew members are reporting complete mental breakdown. I dry swallowed the pills, which tasted even more awful than usual. What happens if the medication stops working? Direct exposure to the entity's consciousness without chemical protection results in immediate and permanent madness. Sophia's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking as she distributed the remaining pills. We're essentially using experimental drugs to fight off telepathic assault from something that's been alive since before human civilization existed. Through the corridor's reinforced windows, I could see more of the creature's arms wrapping around the ship's hull. The glowing patterns were getting brighter, more organized, like it was trying to communicate something. Or maybe it was just getting excited about finally having visitors after 65 million years of solitude. Brittany stumbled past us, clutching a tablet that showed sonar readings I didn't want to understand. Her face was pale, and she kept whispering numbers under her breath. "How big is it?" I asked her. "Bigger than the ship, much bigger." She looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. "The sonar readings show it's approximately 450 meters in length, but that's just the main body. The appendages extend for another 200 meters in each direction. 600 meters total. That was taller than most skyscrapers. It's been sleeping on the trench floor for millions of years," Brittany continued. "Our presence woke it up, and now it's defending its territory the way any animal would. Except this animal is older than complex life on Earth, and it's smart enough to use tools." The ship's hull groaned again, and this time I heard something crack. Not just metal stress, but actual structural failure. We were running out of time. I found Mark in the emergency equipment bay, already climbing into a diving suit that looked more like a spacesuit designed for exploring alien planets. The helmet was huge, with multiple layers of reinforced glass, and the body was covered in sensors and life support systems that buzzed with their own power. "The suit's rated for pressures up to 20,000 feet, he said, checking the seals around his wrists. "Life support should last about 6 hours, assuming the creature doesn't crush me immediately. Mark, please. There has to be another way." "There isn't." He picked up the case containing the pearl, securing it to his suit's chest harness. "The creature wants this thing back, and it's not going to stop attacking the ship until it gets it. But if I take it away from the Rocinante, maybe it'll follow me instead of dragging you all down to the bottom of the ocean." The ship lurched again, and through the equipment bay's porthole, I could see we were definitely moving deeper. The water outside was getting darker, and the pressure readings on the wall displays were climbing past the red danger zones. "Jerry, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "When you get back to the surface, when you go home to Mom, don't tell her what really happened down here. Tell her I died in an equipment accident. Tell her it was quick and I didn't suffer." "I'm not going to have to tell her anything because you're not going to die." Mark finished sealing his helmet and powered up the suit's systems. The heads-up display inside his visor lit up with readings I couldn't make sense of, but they all looked good. "Take care of her, Jerry. And take care of yourself." He walked toward the emergency airlock, a tiny chamber that would let him leave the ship without losing air pressure in the whole section. Through the thick glass of the door, I could see the dark water waiting for him. "Mark, wait." He turned back to me, and through his helmet's visor, I could see his face clearly for what I knew would be the last time. He looked calm, almost peaceful, like he'd finally found something worth dying for. "I love you, little brother. Remember that." Then he stepped into the airlock, sealed the door behind him, and began the process that would send him out into the dark water with a glowing alien artifact and a creature that had been waiting 65 million years for someone to try to steal its treasure. I pressed my face against the airlock's observation window and watched my brother disappear into the depths, carrying the only thing that might save the rest of us. The airlock sealed with a sound like a coffin closing. I pressed my hands against the observation window, watching Mark run through his final equipment checks inside that tiny chamber. His movements stayed calm and methodical, like he was getting ready for a routine dive instead of swimming toward certain death. The Pearl's case was strapped to his chest, glowing faintly through the metal, and his suit's life support systems buzzed with steady green lights. He looked up at me through the thick glass and gave me a thumbs up, as if this was all going to be fine. The outer door opened, and my brother stepped into 3 miles of black water, carrying an alien artifact and a death wish. I ran to the nearest external camera monitor, switching feeds until I spotted him. A tiny figure in a bulky suit, dropping away from the ship's lights like a falling star. The Pearl's glow showed even through the case, a soft blue-white light that pulsed with a rhythm I didn't want to understand. Visual contact with diver, Sandra reported from her station, her voice tight with stress. Depth 200 meters and descending. Charlotte stood at the center of the navigation room, hands gripping the back of a chair so hard her knuckles were white. Emergency ballast systems on standby. The moment that creature releases us, we're going up. The ship groaned around us, metal bending under the pressure of whatever was wrapped around our hull. Through the external cameras, I could see more of those massive arms, covered in scales that bounced our lights back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The thing was enormous beyond belief, and we were trapped in its grip like a toy in a giant's fist. 300 meters, Sandra called out. Still descending. Mark's lights were getting smaller, harder to track against the complete darkness of the deep ocean. But the Pearl's glow was getting brighter, more intense, like it was responding to the closeness of whatever had been guarding it for millions of years. Sophia showed up at my elbow with her medical bag, checking on crew members who were starting to crack under the stress. 2 of the engineers were sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth and muttering about voices in their heads. Another was staring at the wall with the kind of blank look that meant his brain had decided to shut down rather than deal with what was happening. The medications are losing effectiveness, Sophia said quietly. Direct proximity to the entity is overwhelming our chemical defenses. How long before we all lose it completely? At this rate? Maybe an hour before we start seeing complete psychological breakdown across the crew. The ship lurched suddenly, a violent motion that threw everyone against the nearest solid surface. But this time it felt different. Not the creature tightening its grip, but something else. Something that made the hull ring like a bell. "What was that?" Charlotte demanded. Brittany looked up from her sonar displays, her face pale. Something just hit the creature. Something small, but moving really fast. Mark. He'd reached the thing. The external cameras couldn't see far enough into the darkness to show us what was happening. But the sonar readings told the story. 2 contacts, one massive and one tiny, moving in patterns that looked like a fight. The creature's glowing displays were getting brighter, more worked up, and the water around the ship was starting to fill with particles that sparkled like underwater snow. 500 meters, Sandra reported. The diver is... Wait. Her voice cut off, and she pressed her headphones tighter against her ears, listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. "What is it?" Charlotte asked. "I'm picking up a transmission. Very faint, but it's coming from the diver's suit." Sandra connected the signal to the navigation room speakers, and Mark's voice came through. warped by water and distance, but definitely his. "Jerry, if you can hear this, I need you to know something." My throat went tight. He sounded calm, almost peaceful, like he was just calling to say hello instead of swimming toward his death. "I didn't bring you on this mission because you were expendable. I brought you because you're the strongest person I know, and I knew you'd be able to handle whatever came next. Take care of Mom. Tell her I love her." The transmission cut to static, then silence. On the sonar display, the two contacts merged into one. Then the huge signature began moving away from our position, diving deeper into the trench with something that might have been my brother, or might have been the Pearl, or might have been both. The crushing force on the ship's hull suddenly released. "Now!" Charlotte shouted. "Emergency ballast! Full power!" The Rocinante shot upward with enough force to slam everyone to the deck. Emergency systems that had been quiet for hours suddenly came alive, pumping compressed air into ballast tanks and firing thrusters that pushed us away from the bottom. The hull groaned and creaked as we rose, but it was the sound of metal under stress, not metal breaking apart. We were going up. I pulled myself to my feet and stumbled to the nearest porthole, looking down into the darkness we were leaving behind. Somewhere in that black water, my brother was gone. Maybe dead, maybe something worse than dead, but gone either way. "Ascent rate holding steady," Brittany reported. "Hull integrity at acceptable levels. We're going to make it." Sophia moved between crew members, injecting sedatives into anyone showing signs of complete breakdown. 3 people were unconscious. 2 more were restrained and babbling about cosmic emptiness, and the rest of us were hanging on by chemical threads and sheer stubbornness. "Communications are still down," Sandra said. "We won't be able to contact the surface until we reach shallow water." The climb took 12 hours. 12 hours of listening to the hull adjust to decreasing pressure. 12 hours of watching depth gauges count down from 14,000 feet to something approaching normal. 12 hours of wondering if the creature would change its mind and come after us. But it didn't. Whatever Mark had done down there, whatever deal he'd struck or price he'd paid, it had worked. The thing stayed in its trench, and we kept rising. When we finally broke the surface, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed incredibly bright after days in the deep darkness. The crew that was still conscious gathered on deck, breathing fresh air and feeling wind on their faces for the first time in what felt like years. I stood at the rail, staring out at the endless stretch of ordinary ocean, and tried to wrap my head around the fact that my brother was never coming back. The money he'd promised me, the answer to all our troubles, felt worthless now. What good was $50,000 when it had cost Mark his life? Charlotte came up beside me, looking like she'd aged years since we'd started this mission. Her hair had new gray streaks that weren't there before, and her eyes had that empty look of someone who'd witnessed too much. "He saved us all," she said quietly. "What your brother did down there, drawing that thing away from the ship, it was the only reason any of us made it to the surface. Was it worth it?" Charlotte stayed quiet for a while, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "Ask me in 10 years, when we know what the government does with the data we collected. Ask me when we find out if there are more of those things down there, and whether someone else is going to have to make the same choice your brother made." She walked away, leaving me alone at the rail with the taste of salt air and the knowledge that some prices are too high to pay, even when you don't have a choice about paying them. The rescue ships found us 3 hours later, and by morning we were back in port, back in a world where the biggest problems were traffic jams and overdue bills and whether it might rain tomorrow. Normal problems, human problems, problems that seemed tiny after you'd looked into the eye of something that remembered when the dinosaurs died. The government facility looked like every other office building in downtown Seattle. Glass and steel, beige carpets, fluorescent lights that buzzed just loud enough to give you a headache. Nothing about it suggested that 3 days ago, I'd been 3 miles underwater watching my brother swim toward certain death while carrying an alien artifact. I sat in a conference room that could have been used for insurance seminars or quarterly sales meetings, answering the same questions I'd been fielding for 6 hours straight. The two officials across from me, Agent Morrison and Agent Chen, though I was pretty sure those weren't their real names, had the kind of bland, forgettable faces that probably came with the job. "Let's go through the timeline one more time," Morrison said, clicking his pen. "When did you first become aware that the mission involved extraterrestrial materials?" "During the classified briefing. Charlotte told us about the artifact and the creature protecting it. And your brother's decision to leave the ship with the artifact, was that planned or spontaneous?" "Spontaneous." The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "He said someone had to draw the creature away from the ship." Chen jotted something down on her tablet. "Did Mark Torres talk about wanting to hurt himself before the mission?" "He wasn't suicidal. He was trying to save everyone. But he knew the action would likely result in his death." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to figure out how to explain that my brother had died a hero to people who were treating his sacrifice like a number on their spreadsheet. "Yeah, he knew." Morrison leaned forward. "Jerry, we get that this has been rough on you. The mental toll from deep-sea ops, especially when you run into things that shouldn't exist, can really mess with your head. That's why we're setting you up with full support services." He pushed a folder across the table. Inside sat a check for $50,000, just like he'd promised, plus a thick stack of legal papers that would probably keep me quiet about what I'd seen down there for the rest of my life. "The non-disclosure agreement is standard for classified operations," Chen explained. "It protects both national security and your own safety. There are individuals and organizations who would go to extreme lengths to obtain information about these artifacts." I grabbed the check, staring at the numbers that were supposed to fix everything. 3 days ago, this money had been all I could think about. Now it felt like payment for watching my brother die. "What happened to the others?" "Captain Reeves is receiving specialized treatment for deep-sea psychological trauma," Morrison said carefully. "Dr. Allen and Communications Officer Jacobs are being debriefed at separate facilities, standard protocol for operations of this nature." "And Sophia?" "Dr. Becker has been very helpful in developing treatment protocols for the psychological effects of entity exposure. She'll be continuing her work with our medical team." The way he said it made it sound like Sophia was the only one of us who'd returned from the deep ocean with her mind intact. Maybe that was true. Maybe the drugs she'd been giving us had shielded her better than the rest of us. Or maybe she was just better at hiding the damage. "There's one more thing," Chen said, pulling out another document. "We'd like to offer you a position as a consultant on future deep-sea recovery operations. Your mechanical engineering background and first-hand experience with these entities make you valuable to the program." "Future operations?" "The artifact your team recovered was one of several detected at various deep-sea locations. The program is expanding. I thought about other crews, other brothers, other people who'd be asked to swim into the dark carrying alien pearls while very old things watched from the depths." "No." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "The compensation would be substantial, significantly more than the current contract." I said no. I signed the non-disclosure agreement, pocketed the check, and walked out of that beige conference room into a world that looked exactly the same as it had a week ago. but felt completely different. The sky was too bright, the sounds of traffic too loud, and every shadow seemed to hide something with too many eyes. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, down to the stack of overdue bills on the kitchen table. Except the bills weren't overdue anymore. Every single one had been paid in full, with confirmation numbers and payment dates from 2 weeks ago, before we'd even left Seattle. There was also a new lease agreement on my counter, signed and notarized, covering my rent for the next 2 years. The signature at the bottom was Mark's, dated the day before our mission began. He'd known he wasn't coming back, and he'd made sure I'd be taken care of anyway. I found the letter taped to the inside of my medicine cabinet, where he knew I'd eventually look. My name was written on the envelope in his neat handwriting. Jerry. If you're reading this, then the mission went exactly like I expected. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything before we left, but you wouldn't have gone if you'd known what was really happening. And Mom needs that money more than I need to come home. I've been working on this plan for months. The medical bills, the rent, everything's paid for. The government money is yours to keep. Consider it payment for having to deal with what you saw down there. I know you're mad at me for signing you up for this. You've got every right to be. But I also know you can handle it. You're tougher than you realize. You always have been. Take care of Mom. Don't tell her what really happened. Let her think it was an accident, something quick and painless. She doesn't need to know about the rest of it. I love you, little brother. I'm proud of you. Mark. I read the letter 3 times before the words started to blur. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with our father's watch and the few other things I had left of my family. The nightmares started that night. Not the weird underwater dreams I'd been having on the ship, but something much worse. I'd dream I was back in that storage room, watching Mark seal himself into the diving suit. Except in the dreams, I could see through the water, could watch him sinking through the black towards something that was waiting for him with a patience that went back thousands of years. Sometimes I had nightmares about the creature's eye, that huge alien intelligence that had stared at me through the porthole and judged me lacking. Sometimes I had nightmares about the pearl, glowing with light that spelled out messages in languages that came before human speech. But most nights, I had nightmares about Mark vanishing into the dark water, again and again, while I stood behind reinforced glass and did nothing to save him. Sophia started coming by a week after I got back. She'd appear at my door with coffee and a professional smile, asking how I was sleeping, whether I was having any auditory or visual hallucinations, if I'd noticed any changes in my appetite or mood. The psychological effects of entity exposure can be delayed, she explained during one of our sessions. The drugs I gave you on the ship provided temporary protection, but the human mind isn't designed to process that kind of cosmic awareness. It takes time for the full impact to manifest. How much time? It varies. Some people adapt within a few months. Others, she trailed off, adjusting her glasses. Others require more intensive treatment. What happened to Charlotte? Sophia stayed quiet for a moment, picking her words with care. Captain Reeves is getting the best possible care. The facility where she's being treated specializes in cases like hers. Cases like hers? Individuals who've had prolonged exposure to anomalous entities. The psychological trauma can be significant. I thought about Charlotte standing in the navigation room, calm and capable even while something older than the dinosaurs was trying to crush our ship. If she couldn't handle what we'd seen down there, what chance did the rest of us have? Jerry, there's something else you should know, Sophia said. The government has classified the entire mission, Officially, the Rocinante was conducting routine deep-sea mineral surveys when it encountered equipment failure. Your brother died in a diving accident. And the creature doesn't exist. Neither does the artifact. As far as the official record is concerned, none of it ever happened. But it had happened. I could still feel the ship's hull groaning under the pressure of those massive arms, could still taste the cosmic despair that had flooded my mind when I'd looked into that alien eye. The money in my bank account was real. The paid bills were real. And the empty space where my brother used to be was the most real thing of all. "They're planning more missions," Sophia said quietly. "Other locations, other artifacts. The program is expanding. More people like Mark? More people like all of us." I walked to my window and looked out at the city, at all the regular people living their everyday lives, completely unaware that things lurked in the deep ocean that remembered when the world was young. Traffic moved through the streets, people strolled on sidewalks, planes flew overhead, and none of them knew that human civilization was built on top of something much older and far more dangerous. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Going down there?" Sophia stayed silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Ask me in 10 years when we know what they do with the data we collected. Ask me when we find out if there are more of those things down there, and whether someone else is going to have to make the same choice your brother made." After she left, I sat in my apartment and tried to figure out how to live with the knowledge that my brother had died saving us from something that shouldn't exist, in a place that officially didn't matter, for reasons that would never appear in any history book. The $50,000 sat in my bank account like something I couldn't touch. Blood money. Payment for watching cosmic horror unfold and keeping my mouth shut about it afterward. But Mark had been right about one thing. I was tough enough to handle it. Tough enough to carry what I'd seen. Tough enough to live with the nightmares. Tough enough to keep the secret that would die with me. I just wasn't sure if that strength was something to be grateful for or something to regret.